Walter, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just piggyback on Walter's opening comments. During the course of the morning and this afternoon, we heard a lot of talk about various projects in Ukraine, various sectors that are ripe for development. The issue, of course, that arises, and I think some of this was in the Q&A during those sessions, one of the issues that arises is how do you pay for this? And who pays for all of this? You know, we've heard the World Bank give estimates every year, in February, I think it is, about how much it will cost to reconstruct Ukraine. I think the latest estimate for 2026 was a little under $600 billion over a 10-year period. And quite frankly, I think that's too cheap. It's probably well over $1 trillion to rebuild the country. So what we would like to do over the next 80 minutes or so is address the issue of how do you who finances this, how does it get financed, and what sectors may necessarily need the primary injection of capital to start rebuilding the country. And there are two avenues to this, both very important. One avenue is kind of the international organizations and governments, and then the other avenue is the private sector itself, investment houses, banks, et cetera, that can play roles in this. So what I hope to do is over the next 80 minutes or so, pick on some of the leading minds to give us some insight on how these two sectors can help Ukraine develop a financial package or how the financing can be injected into this reconstruction process. Starting us off, we'll focus on the institutional side. For example, we have with us Zain Shamim, who's the Director of Equity at the Development Finance Corporation, U.S. Development Finance Corporation. And joining him will be Dimitri Gvindadze, who's Director of Regional Policy at EBRD, the Economic Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And Dimitri will be joining us by Zoom, I believe, out of London. I think he's back in London.
Sure.
Oh, are you listening?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, welcome, Dimitri. I'm glad you could listen in on this session before we actually start and all. So as I mentioned, Zain is Director of Private Equity at DFC. And what I would like to do is turn the microphone over to him so he can give us some insight on DFC. We heard, Zain, I don't know how much you heard this morning, but there were a lot of questions. And I spoke to John, your colleague, who's here from DFC, John Duke. And a lot of the questions revolved actually about DFC. Is there insurance for projects? Is there funding for projects? And so I think anything you could tell us in terms of shedding light on the role of DFC and how you can stimulate investment in Ukraine and support capital investment through insurance as well as through guarantees will be very, very helpful. So Zain, let me turn to you.
Great. Thank you, Roman. Thank you, everyone, for joining and for having me. So Zain Shamim, I'm a director with the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, also known as the DFC. And the DFC is a government agency entirely owned by the U.S. Government. We are the international arm of the U.S. government, as well as the development bank. So the DFC's history goes back to the 60s or 70s. The predecessor agency was called OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which many are likely familiar with. And OPIC's roots were primarily lending and insurance. And so DFC's, fast forward a few decades, DFC is created in 2020 under the first Trump administration. And the balance sheet then was doubled from 30 billion up to 60 billion. And so fast forward again to this past December, and the balance sheet for DFC is actually quadrupled from 60 billion up to 205 billion. And the U.S. Congress had reauthorized the DFC for another 7 years. So main story of that being that the DFC has continued to be a successful program that's actually received bipartisan support for a number of decades and still continues to receive bipartisan support today. And the DFC is a main tool for both international development, economic development, but then also U.S. foreign policy. I'm Zain Shamim. I'm a director on our direct equity investments team. When I referenced the DFC going from 30 to 60, Congress also gave the DFC authority to do direct equity investments. And so that means the U.S. government becoming an actual shareholder into companies, into funds, and into projects and other platforms. And so where I sit, I'm leading our direct investments globally across infrastructure and energy, We're a minority investor by law at the DFC and deploying tickets to try and mobilize private capital, investments to mobilize private capital. So that's a little bit of the overview of DFC today. Our mandate is threefold, really. One is to drive economic development. Two is to do so in an investment-oriented format. And then three is in alignment with U.S. foreign policy, which can mean a lot of different things depending on where you are. But if I bring this all together into how it's relevant today for Ukraine, so the US-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, or the URIF, it was a fund that was created just over the past 12 months. And this is a sovereign partnership between the government of the US and the government of Ukraine. And on the US side, it is primarily the DFC, which is the implementing agency, but there's also partnership with the US Treasury and other parts of government. And then on the Ukrainian side, it's the Ministries of Economy PPP agency. And so this is a collaborative vehicle that's been set up, and it's actually set up as a fund and has been capitalized with 150 million in initial capital from both sides, so 75-75. And this is meant to drive catalytic capital into Ukraine to drive reconstruction investment. And so this capital is locked up for 10 years. And this is just a first piece. Obviously, Roman had mentioned hundreds of billion plus required for reconstruction. And the small corpus of capital today is meant to be a start and to drive initial investment in even during a wartime period. I can go into a little bit of the focus of where the fund invests today. It can really be summarized into three main areas. One being critical minerals and mining. I think that one's obvious after the minerals partnership months ago. But it is not only minerals and mining that became known as a minerals deal, but the DFC was actually brought in to create something a bit larger. So minerals and mining is one. Critical infrastructure is another sector. And critical infrastructure includes, it's quite wide. So that's energy, infrastructure, transport, and logistics. So that could include ports, rail, digital infrastructure as well. So critical infrastructure is that second bucket. And then the third one is emergent technology. So that is meant to drive investment into Ukraine's growing defense industrial base, which is obviously of importance to the US and to the DFC. So a lot to throw at everyone, but wanted to explain what the URIF is and DFC's role. And this is primarily set up today as an equity investment vehicle, which invests directly into projects. However, over time, and even today, we're looking to see how can DFC's balance sheet and other capabilities be looped in to drive additional reconstruction, including insurance, including direct project financing, because that is obviously the bread and butter of what a lot of DFC does. And there's a lot of work and progress that has continued to come from the DFC and from URIF and from our Ukrainian partners. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Sorry to make the initial intro so long, but happy to answer questions and make this a conversation.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to Zain, thank you very much. Before we move on to Dimitri, I just want to note that on our program, we have Alejandro Alvarez de la Campa, who is the country director for Ukraine listed. He's from the International Finance Corporation. Unfortunately, at the last minute, he couldn't join us. He was going to join us virtually also, but he had a major conflict. So his apologies to everyone that he can't be with us. But IFC was very much interested in sharing their views on this occasion. With that, Dimitri, I'd like to turn to you. If you hear me now, if you could please give us the EBRD perspective, that would be most welcome.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a big pleasure and honor to speak here as part of this panel. EBRD was established in 1991. EBRD is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
We hear you.
EBRD stands for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We were established in 1991, and we were originally established to help build a new post-Cold War era in the Central and Eastern Europe. Ever since the bank has been expanding, we recently entered the Sub-Saharan Africa, and we launched our operations in Sub-Saharan Africa through several decades of our existence, 3+ decades of our existence. We invested more than 220 billion euros in close to 8,000 projects. The EBRD serves the interests of all its shareholders, 77 countries from 5 continents, plus the European Union and the European Investment Bank. And the number of the EBRD shareholders still keeps increasing. Now, as far as Ukraine is concerned, today's Ukraine's fight against this geopolitical revisionism is key to making this transition, which the bank, the EBRD, was created to serve and to promote irreversible. I lived in Kiev in 2014-15 when Russia attacked for the first time. There was lots of pain back then. Many were stunned in disbelief back then. I don't think many would imagine ballistic missiles landing in Ukraine's capital and major cities, killing thousands of civilians, and this is truly was and is beyond imagination. Now, Ukraine is a high potential country. In a geopolitically conducive context, you would expect Ukraine to leverage its advantages to ensure fast convergence with high income countries. And yet, Ukraine's real output in 2026 is almost the same as it was in 2014 when the war started. Average GDP growth in the last 12 years was negative, largely due to the economic contractions in 2014 and 15, and especially in 2022 due to the full-scale invasion from Russia. Fiscal deficit increased on the back of the military spending, and government debt to GDP ratio increased from 40% in 2013 to more than 100% now, which is clearly above the debt intolerance threshold. Big challenges require bold vision. I'm glad that this bold vision is taking shape in Ukraine, but also across many of its international allies and partners. We in the EBRD are committed to supporting Ukraine during the war and during the post-war reconstruction. This is our overarching priority because, as I said, what happens in Ukraine will not stay in Ukraine. It will be shaping trajectories of the state building in the EBRD's other countries of operation. A few months ago, EBRD secured its general capital increase. This will enable us to continue providing significant and sustained investment into Ukraine's real economy, both in wartime and during the reconstruction. Now, let me share with you a few numbers. EBRD's net cumulative investment in Ukraine is approximately 24 billion euros for close to 700 projects. This means that Ukraine is one of the EBRD's key countries of operation by both volume and number of projects. Private sector share of these cumulative investments is more than 70%, 70. Private sector is really one of the EBRD's priorities across our countries of operation, and I'm glad that this value proposition plays out well in Ukraine as well. Our annual business investment in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion was in the range of 1 billion euros. During the war, we scaled up our business volume significantly. Thus, last year in 2025, our annual investment in Ukraine was close to 2.5 billion euros. Since 2022, we deployed in Ukraine close to 8 billion euros, of which more than half in the private sector. 1/3 of this amount was invested into the energy sector because of the urgent needs, due to the destruction of the critical infrastructure. Our investments align with the priorities of Ukraine, I guess. The energy security, vital infrastructure repair and development, food security, private sector resilience, and trade facilitation. Beyond provision of various forms of finance, we deployed multiple policy dialogue work streams across sectors where we are active. Reform support teams with more than 300 experts work across key government institutions across multiple reform streams: infrastructure, transport, energy, state-owned enterprise, public investment management, utilities, public administration reform, and so on. These reform support teams will hopefully be supporting the EU integration process, which is Ukraine's very important priority going forward. Mobilization of private capital will be key to Ukraine's post-war economic rebound because public sector support alone, irrespective of how abundant it may be, and we mentioned the numbers, which are close to $500 billion, even more, will not be enough. The public sector support alone. Thus, our key priority of the EBRD, but also of other multilateral development banks and of international development partners, is to ensure mobilization of the private capital at scale. This is EBRD's important task given our private sector franchise and the fact that 3/4 of our work across our countries of operation is in the private sector. And this brings me to the last remark. Ukraine needs peace, but this peace must be just and lasting. It requires real external security anchors of stability to sustain peace and fully absorb the reconstruction investments. And these investments can come in many different forms and many different sectors. Think of the smart cities and urban technology, or distributed energy and grid modernization, or precision agriculture and agri-tech, or IT services and software experts, construction materials and prefab reconstruction, rail infrastructure and intermodal logistics, pharmaceutical manufacturing and biotech, critical minerals and related supply chains, port and waterway logistics and multimodal trade routes, circular economy and waste management. This is a long list and it goes on. And this is what I mean when saying for Ukraine, the sky is the limit. I'll probably stop here because I've spoken for too long. And I would just say victory to Ukraine and glory to its heroes. Thank you.
Okay, Dimitri, thank you very much. We'll have time for some questions, and as moderator, I'm going to take the prerogative of asking the first question. Let me start with you, Dimitri, since you just finished speaking. I have kind of not a complex question, but a combination of questions. And I don't know if it's totally in your bailiwick, but I'd like to get your impressions. Obviously, Ukraine's movement toward the EU is going to be very important, and eventual joining of the EU. Can you give us a time frame from your perspective, what the status of that is for Ukraine right now? That would be very, very helpful if you could give us an idea on that. And can you give us, I know that EBRD is the largest, I believe, investor in Ukraine, so to speak, and you gave some of the numbers and all. Can you tell us what the main focus at this stage of the game may be from the EBRD perspective? I know you mentioned a few sectors, but is this something that you want to rebuild the energy sector first before anything else, or some other sectors? So to kind of, if you could combine those two questions. Actually, third question, forgive me, is going back to the EU issue, do you see Ukraine moving clearly to pass all the threshold markers that the EU is putting down for Ukraine to, gain membership?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, the first question is very complex, and as you can imagine, I cannot provide the clear time-bound answer to this question. Because this depends on many factors, related to the politics of the European Union, politics of in the United States. The future of NATO, the future of the European Union, how far the European Union would expand, the internal institutional reforms within the European Union. So this discussion is going on, and I can't really forecast, the outcome, especially the time-bound outcome. As far as the EBRD is concerned, we can deploy our products and instruments across the priority areas of the EBRD in the financial sector, where we have a strong presence already in Ukraine, and we continue working with them, both in the context of building resilience, but also in the context of the post-war rehabilitation and modernization of the financial intermediation. Sustainable infrastructure, which is energy. Clearly energy is at the core of whatever we are doing, because of the vulnerabilities that it creates for the rest of the economy, for the real sector. It is municipal infrastructure, because again, municipal infrastructure has suffered significantly, during the war, but it will require lots of funding after the war, to rebound. And then the real sector, the corporate sector, we work, if you look at our footprint across our country's operation in the corporate sector, it is agriculture, it is real estate, it is telecommunications and media, it is manufacturing and services. So, in all of these sectors, we've got our strategies and we've got our toolkit, which is quite time tested, I would say, across many countries of operation. And Ukraine is going to be one of those countries, where we would be keen to work, and keen to scale up as much as possible, and as much as the conditions allow. I mentioned the capital increase of the EBRD, and our capital was increased by 4 billion euros. And one of the key reasons why the shareholders, including the United States, supported the capital increase is because, that allows us to do more in Ukraine, and in other countries of operation. But Ukraine is one of the key countries, clearly, because as I said, what happens in Ukraine is not going to stay in Ukraine. It's going to be impacting very significantly many other countries of operation of the EBRD, especially in Eastern Europe, in the Caucasus and elsewhere.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Zain, I'd like to turn back to something you mentioned earlier in your opening remarks. You talked about three areas where DFC is most focused. Can you give us a two-part question here? Number one, do you notice an increased volume of interest in DFC over the past year or so in terms of interest from U.S. companies? I'm trying to use that as a barometer of interest in Ukraine because, for a long time, people say, yeah, Ukraine's important, but, they've got corruption, they've got war, and we don't want to touch that as an investment. Have you noticed any uptick in interest over the last year? Because there's been so much talk about reconstruction and everything. So I was just wondering that. Also, could you give us an idea, if I'm going to build a widget in Ukraine, for example, what are the mechanics? Do you do a 50-50 loan, or do you do debt, equity? How would it operate? I think it'll be very informative for a lot of people in the audience to know how actually DFC does an investment guarantee.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And those are good questions. So I think on the first one of market interest into DFC and Europe, that has absolutely increased over the past year. I think even if we take a step back, even prior to the full-scale invasion, Ukraine has always been an area that's been of interest for investment for U.S. corporates. This is a highly educated workforce. This is close to Europe. DFC works very closely with a lot of U.S. technology companies and U.S. hyperscalers, Google, Meta, et cetera, who have invested quite a lot into Eastern Europe. They've invested directly into Poland, and Ukraine has always been another area of significant interest. I think the technology and engineering talent that exists in Ukraine is another just fundamentally attractive investment component. So I think now as you get into today, post full-scale invasion, the interest from U.S. companies continues to remain strong and is actually increasing compared to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where no one is really looking to deploy new capital, new capex into the country. We are seeing this interest from a range of players directly involved, whether they're U.S. Oil and gas players who are looking to provide services to develop upstream wells or other parts of the value chain, or whether it's other players that are serving into the rest of Europe. I think the strategic value of Ukraine for the rest of Europe is another important one to click into, where this is one of the largest gas reserves in the world and one of the largest in all of Europe. So that fundamental point will not go away even during a wartime, and even when there is peace. The importance of Ukraine is important for Europe. I think the conflict we're seeing now and the impact to oil and energy markets, which is one of the largest we've ever seen, Ukraine can play a role in providing a solution, whether that's storage or gas to rest of Europe, Ukraine, and the neighboring countries. So that's where U.S. companies and U.S. industries are seeing value, and global players as well. And so what is DFC's role in this? DFC's role is to de-risk and mobilize capital into markets. Ukraine, yes, there's always comments of corruption, difficult business environment, and it's hard to get things done. That's why the EURIF has been created with the DFC and with the Ukrainian government to provide an actual force to try to provide de-risked investment, because then we see that first billion or so that will have to go in can then serve as kind of a cyclical flywheel that'll mobilize more and more capital where investors see returns and strategic value. So short answer, I think interest is increasing. Some of the numbers we can also point to, if you Google and the EURIF, there's been announcements in the press as well, where we've had over 300 applications into the EURIF portal. So that's how one of the channels that go into investment requests. There's a public portal, eurifinvest.com, I believe. And we have a fund advisor that is Alvarez and Marsal, and they review all of our fund applications. So that's one way. And that's a central repository for all applications. And over 300 applications have been reviewed today, and we have a wide pipeline and funnel that we're looking to process transactions as we can. This has obviously been a new fund that's been created, but we've closed our first investment just a few weeks ago in the defense tech space, and then we'll be announcing a few more investments likely around Ukraine Recovery Conference in June, and a number of other investments through the rest of this year. We're one player, and we also work collaboratively with a lot of other funding sources, the EBRD and IFC included. And so we look to co-invest with private sector and with public sector, although we invest primarily into private. So I think into the other question that you had on
the mechanics of it,
yeah,
your caps and
mechanics and kind of capitalization, the capital structure. So as I've mentioned, URIF is primarily an equity vehicle today. We own no more than 40% of a project or a company. We seek to mobilize other capital and want to bring other investors in alongside of us. And we often do not seek to lead kind of investment rounds, although we do have flexibility too. So if there's other investors who are looking to invest into a project or a company, and that's somewhere where DFC can participate and play a de-risking role, that's one way we do get quite excited about transactions. I think there's also has to be a real investment and kind of business case. These are investments. We don't have a statutory return or a hurdle rate, so we are quite flexible and we're not maximizing for a financial return, but we look to partner with sponsors and with companies that have a track record either in country or in the industry, or have, whatever it may be. So we, earliest stage new ventures that are being stood up, we may not be the most appropriate source of capital for that, but something related to the three buckets that I mentioned, and with players who have a track record, that's somewhere where we would look to invest in and partner through our involvement.
All right, thank you. Let me just throw it out to the audience now if anyone has any questions. Yep. Carl?
I'm Carl Valentine from Morgan Lewis. So historically, OPIC and the political risk insurance has been important to both de-risk investment, but also to mobilize capital and provide credit enhancements. What's the prospect of DFC opening up the political risk insurance market in Ukraine? And then related to the fund, I'm curious what U.S. government requirements or conditions are in there. You want to mobilize capital, but those can be heavy for an investor that might be off-putting if the government wants to exercise, for example, golden share rights in investment. Maybe you could address both those points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think on the political risk insurance piece, very relevant and topical. It's a question we get a lot, and rightly so. I think what you will see is the DFC being quite a lot more active in the PRI market, particularly in Ukraine. URIF has been stood up, and the market is clearly saying that you need political risk insurance to provide some sort of cover or wraps around this. And it is never easy to do anything in the government, but I think this is something that's getting the top priority from our leadership, and there will be actions taken here. I think on the other question you had around the golden share and US Nexus requirements, we have no statutory requirements of US Nexus. OPIC historically did, where there had to be either a US owner or US purchase of US equipment or US goods. Why DFC was created was to provide more flexibility. That narrative and those requirements are still important to how we evaluate transactions, but it is not a firm requirement. So we obviously want our investments to drive development investment, but also interest in alignment with U.S. interests. But long story short being that there are no firm requirements.
Yuri?
Thank you. Yuri Gorodnichenko. I have a question about for both speakers. In the morning we had some numbers about how much money Ukraine needs every year going forward during the war and after the war, and we're looking at something like $100 billion a year for quite some time. I know EBRD was investing a lot in Ukraine. DFC has made some investments in Ukraine. But probably it's not enough to cover these needs. We need to pool resources across different development banks, finance corporations, and so on. Since we have representatives from two prominent institutions, can you describe the interaction between you? Do you coordinate? To what extent? Do you have weekly calls to discuss different projects? And if not, do you see scope for establishing a sort of dedicated bank, some type of investment vehicle, quote unquote, Ukrainian bank for reconstruction and development?
Okay. I believe the question was for both. Both. So maybe we'll give Zain a little break here. And Dimitri, if you want to take that question, just to summarize, what's the relationship between EBRD and DFC?
Yeah, look, I think there are some of the key needs, that are related to the budget financing, to the fiscal financing, and there is external funding gap. If you look at the current account deficit, the budget deficit, and the public debt, this is where the key challenges reside. So the support of the European Union, you probably saw a couple of days ago, the announcement about 90 billion, that's going to be critical, macro critical for the country. And that dwarfs everything else at this point, that the multilateral development banks can provide, because we can provide 3 billion, 4 billion, like EBRD, per year. Now, as far as the coordination is concerned, I think the key development partners and multilateral development banks, we are broadly coordinated with among ourselves and with the European Union, because ambassadors meet, the representatives meet, and we try to sound each other out. And by now, I think each of our organizations, banks, we've got our niche, and we are quite clear about the overlaps. We are quite clear about the areas, which represent a competitive edge of the EBRD, for example, of the EIB, of the World Bank, and others. Then there is also the World Bank damage assessment. It was mentioned earlier today in the discussion, 600+ billion euros, and there is a whole list of measures that need to be implemented, and we all look at that and we collectively decide, what was best in case of the EBRD, given our mandate and given the spectrum of the products and instruments that we can deploy. So yes, this coordination happens. Do we need a special bank, Ukrainian bank for reconstruction and development, created by the international community? I don't think, this is something which is in the making at this point. I cannot forecast too far into the future, but for now, there is this financial firepower, to sort of bridge the funding gaps, during the war, and hopefully to foster the economic rebound thereafter.
Thank you. Zain?
Sure. Yeah, I can take the question. I think on the collaboration between the institutions, it's very real and ongoing and regular. I was just in Kiev 3 weeks ago, and we were meeting with the EBRD teams that are on the ground and coordinating on where is our overlap, and then where are we separate, and where should the deal flow be directed towards. I think next Thursday we have a DFC EBRD pipeline call to exchange notes, and so this is an ongoing collaboration because it's very apparent that there's pros and cons to how the capital and deals will flow. If it's critical minerals and mining or upstream oil and gas, that is something DFC is actively leaning into now with our policy leadership. Renewables of certain kinds is less so of what we're doing, but we realize that is very important for reconstruction and to support the energy infrastructure, of which is 50% been wiped out. But that capital, we can help channel those opportunities. And one of the benefits of URIF being one of these first new vehicles created is a lot of the market interest is coming towards us. And so we are channeling that towards the right partners. And then I think on the other question around the size of capital, that the size of capital from URIF today and even DFC's most recent activities is subscale. Absolutely. I think another point that I referenced earlier was the PRI efforts will increase, but co-investment as well, alongside URIF, is another effort that will increase. Our leadership's been very clear that bringing in capital of scale, bringing in the private sector, bringing in asset managers that are based here, that are based all around the world, are going to play a role in filling this full $600 billion gap that exists. And that's why DFC is uniquely positioned, being that kind of US investor that can mobilize US private capital through our balance sheet and structuring.
Okay. Zain, thank you very much. I think we're running out of time. I'm being signaled that we have to move on to the next panel. So I'd like to just thank Dimitri and Zain for being here and for their do you have a question? One last question? No? Do we have time for any question? No? No. Okay. Our next panel, we have to move on to the next panel. I know. I have more. I have more questions, and they really get into the meat of everything, which is very good. Yeah, stay for the reception. So I just want to thank Dimitri and thank Zain for the time and for the effort. I appreciate it very much. I know everyone in the audience appreciates it. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We have to move on to the next panelist. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much, Zain. Appreciate you doing this. Absolutely. Sure. Aukse, they got you here, then Tom, and then Will. I was going to actually ask Tom to lead off because you're giving kind of a European broad perspective. Yeah, so maybe that's a good background scene setter. Okay, and then Aukse, I'll go to you, and then to Will. Okay, let's just move on into our next panel here. We heard from two major international bodies that deal with financing of projects in Ukraine. And now I know everyone's really excited to hear about the private sector. So we have three key panelists here with us this afternoon that'll give us an insight on their organizations, how they view investment in Ukraine, what they may be doing or may not be doing in terms of investment in Ukraine. And then, of course, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Joining us today are Aukse Jurkute, who's with the Bank of America, and is also an advisor to the Ukrainian government on reconstruction issues. So she can give us two different perspectives here. Tom Wicks in the center is with Bessemer Trust. And then at the end, there's Will Weggeland from Carlyle, the Carlyle Group. All three names are pretty much well known to everyone in this room in terms of the finance world. What I'd like to do is ask Tom to lead off the session. He's going to give us kind of a bird's eye view of the European landscape in terms of investment and the views of Ukraine, the views of the chances of Europe moving in their investments toward Ukraine or increasing its investments. So he will kind of set the scene. Then I'll turn to Aukse to give the Bank of America's perspective and possibly the perspective from the Ukrainian government side. And then we'll wrap it up with Will and then open it up to questions. So Tom, it's all yours.
Thank you. Nice to meet everybody. So my name's Tom Wicks. I'm a senior investment strategist at Bessemer Trust. And for those of you who don't know Bessemer Trust, we're a multi-family office originally set up by Henry Phipps back in the early 1900s. Henry Phipps was basically Andrew Carnegie's right-hand man, CFO back at the time. And they both sold their company to JP Morgan back then. And with his part of the money, Henry Phipps turned it into Bessemer Trust. We were a single family office for almost 100 years, and then for the last 30 years have been a multi-family office. I thought today I'd talk about the Ukraine from a public equity market perspective. So I think we've got some private market perspectives coming. And really for public equity investors, the macro investment backdrop is really key. So I think it's important to just reflect back to 2022 and what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, and we really saw a huge inflation spike back then. Inflation in the US at least hit 9%. Equity markets took that very badly. Equity markets globally were down over 20% that year. Bond markets were also down on the inflation shock. So a very stagflationary shock back then. We think the backdrop's very different today, despite the events in the Middle East. I mean, it's easy to forget, but back in 2022, we were coming out of COVID. Consumers had pandemic savings. There was revenge spending going on. Consumers were quite price insensitive. There's a lot of profit-led inflation happening. Very different environment today. Consumers are much more careful with their wallet, much more careful with spending. So we don't think we'll have the same inflationary impulse that we did back in 2022. And I think clearly the equity markets are kind of agreeing with that, with the S&P and most markets close to all-time highs today. So I don't want to frame the equity environment as risk on, but it's definitely, there's always clouds on the horizon, but we think we certainly don't think the backdrop is similar to 2022. So relatively constructive backdrop. And that's important. Clearly for equity investors, earnings are one thing, but the price earnings ratio is almost equally as important. And that's kind of fed through into sentiment. So we think that the sentiment is good. It's definitely reined back a bit given the events in the Middle East, but certainly not enough to kind of scare off equity investors. If you look at the different types of equity investors, typically family offices and hedge funds tend to be earlier investors in themes or asset classes. So I think that would be, as a general statement, the first types of investors to look into a Ukraine recovery. Institutional investors tend to be a bit slower in their movements. So that's, I would say, the second wave of capital is likely to be expected. For the Ukraine equity market, clearly it's very small. So really the way to kind of, for a public equity investor to get exposure is, we believe through some of the large listed industrial companies. And probably the most obvious example, a company that Bessemer Trust owns for our clients is Caterpillar. Caterpillar, as you would all know, has earth moving equipment, which is obviously very important in the early days of Reconstruction, and that would have certainly some thematic exposure along with the mining, excavation, and with the critical minerals we heard about earlier. So clearly in overall terms, the actual Ukraine part of Caterpillar earnings would be small, but that would be definitely a way equity investors could gain exposure. Another company listed in Europe would be Schneider Electric. That's a company that we also have investments in. Schneider actually helped rebuild France after World War I and World War II, and that would help with the electrification again of Ukraine when the time comes. So two companies there. And the other company I would highlight that we're invested in is Heidelberg Cement, or Heidelberg Materials, it's named these days. More based on the aggregates side of things, cement side of things, clearly very important and much needed for the rebuild. And we have exposure to that as well. So it's for a public equity investor point of view, it's more difficult to get specific exposure, but there are ways to get exposure.
Right. Thank you very much, Tom. Aukse?
Sure. So I'll take a slightly sort of different perspective. So I work at Bank of America. I have an equity capital markets background, and 2 years ago, the bank has seconded me to the Ukrainian government to help the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine. So for the last 2 years, we have been advising them on all kinds of projects and issues, but a lot of it, in the beginning at least, was how to use some of the sovereign money that is available to design products that would help bring in some private investment. So the obvious example is war risk insurance that has been mentioned by DFC and EBRD in the previous discussion. Then also how to continue facilitating some of the export credit agency financing. So again, when you have exporters of goods into Ukraine, a lot of it equipment for energy and construction sector, how do you actually get the export credit agencies to guarantee that the Ukrainian buyer is going to be fulfilling their obligations and making some of the financing costs a bit cheaper for them? And then more recently, a lot of time has been spent on the defense tech sector, just because, again, as discussed in 2 panels ago, it is becoming such a big part of the economy. And depending on how and where the export considerations go, it could potentially also be a very significant tax revenue producer for Ukraine, which very much is needed, given the ongoing funding needs. We also spend quite a bit of time on the privatization program. There are a number of assets that are up for privatization. It is a complex situation. I would say about 70% of Ukraine's economy is state-owned. It is concentrated with some of the larger companies, in particular, clearly in the energy sector, both for oil and gas, with Naftogaz and all of its subsidiaries, but also the whole electricity sector. and then, transportation from railways to airports. A lot of these assets are state-owned. There are a number of the assets in the government's portfolio that have been nationalized from the sanctioned entities that had significant assets in Ukraine. And again, the sort of the destiny of those assets is very much to put them into private hands over time to have them better managed and better run. I'd say my overall observations are, and I don't want to be repetitive of so many things that have been said, but what we have been trying to do is we fully understand the challenges that come to investors and to corporates to be looking at Ukraine as a new market. I think there's sort of three categories that I would put at. The companies that have been in Ukraine, they are increasing their investments. Quite naturally, all the consumer companies, the agriculture companies, they've always had big exposure. They are dependent on the supply of the raw materials or inputs from Ukraine, and they continue increasing their exposure. But even some of the companies in the chemical space, in the construction material space, are actually increasing their investments in Ukraine because they see it as a big market, they see it as a big opportunity. Then I would say the focus really is on the companies that are not in Ukraine, but are international companies, and could and should be looking at it as a very big consumer market and as a market that is geographically positioned in a very convenient location, and with the expectation that there will be EU accession in the coming decade or so. And that's really the focus of trying to get all of these companies to be thinking of, okay, what could be our Ukraine strategy? What could be our entry point? When would be the right time for that entry point, and how do we do it? And the third part is investors, which again, I'll leave it to Will comment more, especially sort of on infrastructure funds. It's the question of how do you get them to start looking at Ukraine, to start preparing at this point before the end of the war, to be thinking what are the projects that they're going to be willing to get involved. All of this is going to be a combination of public and private money. But in my experience, working with the Ministry of Economy and the broader government on a number of these initiatives, a number of these projects, as well as all the reforms and everything that they're doing for the EU accession. I'd take a couple observations. Firstly, I always talk about Ukraine as this is what Poland was 20 years ago, but with a much bigger natural resource base. And when you think as a company or as an investor, it's a huge market, both as a consumer market, but also just the territory that it has. And it has a significantly larger amount of resources, natural resources, than Poland had. Secondly, it's a relatively lower cost production market as well, right? And there was a lot of talk about human labor, the advantages of human labor in Ukraine. But if you look, labor costs are about a fifth of what they are in Poland at this point. And yes, we do have some challenges in terms of just availability of labor force, but they are significantly cheaper. You do have the natural resources, whether it's energy, whether it's other metals and mining inputs that go into your production, and then that labor force is extremely skilled, right? And given what they have achieved in the defense sector, that is one of the big testaments of, again, how inventive, innovative, and resourceful that labor force is, and that could apply to many different sectors. The last part, before I finish my remarks, it's very much of this doing the preparation work in advance, right? I think a lot of us will be thinking when this war ends, okay, where do we put the money in? What do we, how do we access this market? How do we consider our first steps? But the opportunity is now. And the opportunity is also with a government that, in my experience, has been extremely open to all kinds of input. It is a lean team that is in the government, but it is a very productive, a very effective team. And they've shown through numerous iterations, through numerous scenarios, that they actually are really open for input. They're really open for business input. There are a number of entities that actually facilitating that dialogue, but even being able to put in that input directly into the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Territories, Ministry of Energy is actually quite feasible, and they are open to it. They very much know that they will have to get to the European standards over time, but there's actually many areas that they want to exceed some of the European standards. And last week at the EU-Ukraine Business Summit, the Polish colleagues were very good in advice in terms of saying, don't gold plate your regulations, right? Try to get to the stage where, again, it is what's needed, it is what's right for the economy, for the EU accession, but don't try to perfect them, because time will take care of it. And clearly, because things are changing so much in so many different sectors, from a development perspective, there will be iterations that will be happening all along the way. So I would say, again, the large consumer market, the big cost advantage, and the fact that you have the government that is very open for input from business community makes it an environment where, again, I believe most of the corporates, international corporates, as well as big investors, should be spending time and should be thinking about where is our investment into Ukraine going to be.
Thank you very much, Aukse. Will?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Will Weggeland, and just to frame the conversation, I'm going to kind of walk you through how we look at direct investment. So to begin, Will Weggeland, my background, I was actually a naval intelligence officer for about 8 years. I had the privilege of deploying out to the Middle East and to Europe in 2023. My deployment to Europe was working the Ukraine crisis. So I got to work with a lot of Ukrainians vis-a-vis the intelligence fusion cell in Naples, Italy. So I understand what they're doing, what they're going through, and how critical a lot of infrastructure, direct infrastructure investment will be. So coming out of the Navy, I joined Carlyle. In case anybody here does not know Carlyle, Carlyle Group was founded in 1987 as a private equity shop. So it is now split between private equity and private credit. About $400 billion in assets under management. On the private credit side, we account for about $205 billion under management. Within the global private credit side of Carlyle, I sit on the Carlyle Infrastructure Credit team. Our team is bifurcated. We manage $10.5 billion worth of capital between investment grade investments and below investment grade investments. So on the investment grade side, our limited partners are generally pension funds, insurance capital. Our below investment grade funds are made up of similar limited partners, pension funds, investment capital, also small family offices. So that's just to frame where we come from. Now, private credit in general and infrastructure private credit, what we invest in, it's about 8 different buckets. It spans renewables, transport logistics, power, energy, social infrastructure, digital infrastructure. We've deployed about $4.5 billion to date after our infrastructure fund was stood up in 2020. And when people think about private credit, especially in this market environment, everyone thinks, oh, there's cracks in private credit. I would push back on that and say that is absolutely firm dependent based on underwriting standards and underwriting fundamentals. We take a project finance approach to underwriting. So we look at contractual cash flows and the credit quality of those counterparties. So let's take a port, for instance. If we were looking at, let's say, a port in Florida, we look at who the counterparties are, what those contracts look like. Is MSC involved? What are they investment grade? Are they below investment grade? We make our decision on pricing completely based on the counterparty's ability to repay said investment or make good on their end of a contract. So that's how we look at things. We have a broad mandate. We've invested in South America. We've invested in Asia, in Australia. I would say primarily we look at the United States, but that's just because that's where most of the deal flow is coming from right now. I guess the way that we would view investment in Ukraine is similar. It is, what is the credit quality of Ukraine at this moment. And if you look at that, it's CCC. I think in January, S&P bumped it from CCC to CCC plus, right on the border of distressed. So how do sovereigns get private credit or private equity involved? And frankly, it comes down to what can the DFC do? What can IFC do? What can the World Bank do? Are there wraps involved with infrastructure projects? Can DFC come in and be first loss equity in a project? Can DFC provide a credit wrap for us? That is going to be the single most important piece that gets private capital to come in. And once you get that first tranche of private capital to come in, then the floodgates are going to open. So it's really, how can private capital work together with DFC to make the first project really come to fruition? And from there, it's going to open up. So I know we had a lot of questions after the last panel. I want to make sure we get to all of those questions. So please feel free to pepper us.
Okay, Will, thank you very much. I want to thank all three panelists for their very cogent, presentations, very helpful in terms of understanding the private sector view of Ukraine. I don't want to monopolize this, so I'd like to throw this out first to the audience to see if there are any questions or comments. Oh, somebody came in on the Zoom. Okay. All right, we have a question from a web viewer, okay? I don't know if it's directed to anyone specifically, but here's the question. Is there any focus on radically building out the investment in data centers, AI, cloud, SaaS in Ukraine, partnering with major tech, Amazon, Apple, Google? Anybody?
So if you ask the government, yes. The question is still has to be done by the private sector.
Okay.
But there's definitely, so again, we had a panel on energy sector, so I don't want to repeat anything, but there's, a significant amount of nuclear and hydro capacity. There's a significant build out of renewable energy as well. But there's quite a bit of energy supply, right? And that's one of the key components for data centers. There's very much a vision from the government to have a significant hub for Europe, not just for Ukraine, but Ukraine itself is going to need quite a bit of capacity. At the end of the day, it is going to come down to the private capital, right? And somebody, one of the either data center companies or one of the big providers has to take that first move. And then the question is, how do you make it dispersed? How do you make it secure? So again, a lot of, I think it was mentioned in one of the other panels, but maybe it's actually even something that you put underground, which is a consideration for a number of manufacturing facilities, especially in the defense tech. But yes, so there's definitely a consideration for it, but it has to be driven by the private sector as the movers. And then the question is again, what kind of energy pricing advantage can be obtained for something like that?
Will, Tom, any private sector
I would
initiatives?
just given the cost of data centers, it clearly really require two things. As you said, energy security, which is or security of energy supply, which is Ukraine ticks the box for, as does the US clearly with the shale gas. But also just physical security. And because they're so expensive, I think even what we're seeing in some of the data centers being built out in the Middle East, it's it's a big investment that can be damaged very quickly. So I would think it's a way off.
Okay.
I haven't seen any direct investment in data centers in Ukraine, come across our team, but I will say that even in the United States, energy is the singular bottleneck. In Ukraine, that is going to be even more so. The trade deficit in Ukraine, and I'm sure there's an economist here that can correct my numbers. I've seen that the deficit for energy, it makes up about 22% of the total trade deficit. So I think just like in the United States, energy is going to be the bottleneck. That needs to get fixed. We are trying to fix it in the United States. I would say 50% of every deal that comes across our desk that we look at from a private credit perspective is digital infrastructure. I would not be surprised if over the next 12 to 18 months, depending on how things go in Ukraine, if the percentage is about that as well. Compute is needed across the world. We're seeing forward deployed compute capacity trying to be put together to sell to Ukraine, but have not seen data center build out specifically.
Yuri?
Thank you, Yuri Gorodnichenko. A lot of discussion today was about multipliers. What kind of thing we can do in Ukraine to unlock more funding? You invest $1 in, war insurance, it's going to unlock, say, $5 for us. If you have political insurance, $1 investment there is going to unlock maybe $10 of private capital. If you have somebody like DFC who can invest $1 in absorbing the first losses on an investment, maybe it's going to unlock $20 of fresh capital. I know it's a lot of guesswork, but if you can get a sense of magnitudes here, is this like a 3-to-1 multiplier, 5-to-1 multiplier, 1-to-100 multiplier? What's the leverage here?
Yeah, I'll take first stab. So the way that we look at it, and I talked about credit quality a little bit, but we look at loan to cost for projects, loan to value. We target between 75 and 90% loan to cost. So that's the capital structure that we would look at. And it would be up to a DFC to get that sovereign rating from Ukraine's a CCC+. If they come in with a credit wrap, maybe Carlyle looks at that as a B flat or a B+. That in and of itself will unlock capital from, at least from the private side, from my experience.
Just from the public equity perspective, I mean, Ukraine's classified as a frontier market, which a lot of investors, institutional investors, are prohibited to invest in. So it would need to get upgraded to an emerging market to have a wider addressable pool of investors, which is probably further down the road. But no, I can't see any short-term immediate catalyst from an institutional investor point of view. It'd be more the capital would come from family offices and smaller institutions would be my guess.
Any other questions? Let me pose a question here myself. Aukse, this is directly mostly to you, but the other two can feel free to weigh in. You mentioned the large government stake in ownership of, entities in Ukraine, and we all know about the state-owned entities in Ukraine, particularly in the energy sector and the defense sector. The defense sector is notorious for a lot of corruption and underperforming, entities in it. You mentioned the government is favorable to maybe breaking this up. Can you say at what stage they are philosophically favorable? Is there an active program toward this? Are they identifying any companies to privatize or to do away with?
Yeah. So again, there's sort of three buckets of assets in the government ownership. So there's the very small enterprises, which will sort of get sold off bit by bit, and some of it sits within the state ownership fund, some of it sits in municipalities or in Noblest level. Then there's kind of the bucket of assets that the government is looking to sell 100% of. So, some of it is some of the concessions or licenses that are available for either a port or a critical minerals mine or, gas fields that will require a lot of CapEx. But some of it are existing companies or existing assets, so again, I think I mentioned some of them, but, alumina production facility, ammonia production facility, some other chemical producing entities, as well as some real estate assets. So that's going to be 100%. I think your question is more towards the large state-owned enterprises and what happens to those. So there's two parts to the government perspective. They do know very well that these entities are going to be better managed with some private ownership. And by private ownership, I mean it could go the IPO route, it could go the minority stake. I think we should be certain that in critical strategic assets, it will only be minorities that will be privatized. So whether it's Naftogaz, whether it's Ukrenergo, whether it's the railways, that will be minority stakes that will be sold. And that's quite typical, especially for sort of this part of the world. You know, we all sort of went through privatization processes of selling minority stakes initially, and then maybe over time they go to public markets with more than 50% that's being sold. But then on the other hand, there's banks, right? And there's a number of banks in the state ownership, and the banking sector in Ukraine has done extraordinarily well, given what they've been through, and they have been a huge provider of tax revenues as well. And with banks that are not strategic assets, the government is more than happy to be selling them entirely. Then the question is of readiness, right? When are these companies actually going to be ready so that while the government is not looking to maximize the proceeds from these assets, you still want to make sure that you get some fair value for it. And a lot of these companies are not quite at that stage. I do believe that in the next 18 to 24 months, we will see some pretty sizable privatizations from some of these sort of single assets, but also from the banks. And I would guess that it's another 3, 4, 5 years before we have the minority stake sales in Naftogaz or Energoatom or Ukrzheliznytsia. But in government's perspective, again, there's clear consciousness that these assets with involvement of public or private markets as shareholders, they're going to be better managed. And therefore, ultimately, that's creating more value for the government and the remaining stakes that they have, that they're not looking to maximize the revenues from these privatizations, but at the same time, they want to have these companies in a more ready state. And then, again, to state the obvious, the value is going to be greater in a non-war circumstances. So the focus for now is to be preparing these assets and to actually do privatizations in the pieces that are smaller and that the government is willing to sell 100% of.
Okay. All right, thank you. Let me follow up with another question, if you don't mind, Aukse. We'll have a conversation here with Aukse. Putting on your hat again as a government advisor, and not to put you too much on the spot here, but if you could address this issue. A few years back, as you recall, BlackRock entered with a lot of fanfare that they were going to raise capital for Ukraine. They were going to get investors in and everything. And then about a year or so ago, they pulled out, or 18 months ago, they pulled out, saying that there was no interest, not being too melodramatic on my statement here. But more recently, they've come back, and I think JP Morgan may have joined them and some other firms, that they're going to be advising the government in terms of how to attract capital. Has this second round of effort gone anywhere? How successful is it? What is the status of it?
So I don't know if I'm the best person to comment on that, but I don't think a whole lot has happened on that. Having said that, there are a number of funds that have actually been established. Now, again, they're still primarily backed by sovereign money. So, we know about Eurofund that Zain mentioned from DFC. There's a 500 million flagship fund that has been raised, EU flagship fund that has been raised for, again, equity investments in Ukraine. That is the beginning, the first half of it was all sovereign money. The other half of it is private money. Horizon Capital, which has been, a private equity firm that has been operating in Ukraine for quite a long time, they raised another 300 million fund for. They typically in the past had more of a tech and consumer focus. This is more for energy and hard asset industries. The Dragon Infrastructure Fund, again, raised, I may not get the number right, but I believe 250 or 350 million specifically for infrastructure. So there are some funds that are being raised. They are not the 15 billion that BlackRock originally talked about. They are smaller, and still very big portions of it is, sovereign money that is being put to work and catalyzing that additional dollar of private money to be brought in. So there are funds that are being raised, but we don't have a Ukraine investment fund that will be $10-15 billion. It's in the work right now, at least that I'm aware of.
Okay. Any questions? If not, I have another question. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Walt.
I actually do. Micro assets, private micro assets, folks that are sitting around the universities. Maybe it's because of a long attachment to universities. I have a thing about the universities. Has American private capital looked at the possibility that these micro assets, these folks that are actually helping the guys on the front line engineer a lot of this stuff, that these little startups, with 5-6 guys somewhere in a garage doing jobs, imitating jobs in Wozniak. Is it possible that you may be missing something there? Or is there a scouting possibility by the folks and in your business to check those folks out? Because there are a lot of those things going on in Ukraine, and they are going to be very profitable. And I think in the last year or two, they've actually increased the capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces. So sorry about the long-winded question.
So I think you have to separate defense tech from the rest of SMEs. And on defense tech, again, I don't want to repeat what was said in the previous panels, but there's quite a bit of scouting of capital that's happening, right, with the help of the government to facilitate. So again, I think Irina was the one who mentioned Brave One, which is this cluster, very effective cluster that has been created between a number of ministries, but really to facilitate the capital raising for the defense tech sector. They took 16 companies on a roadshow to 6 different cities across the States. Now they're going to Greece, they're going to London, they're going to Paris. There's quite a lot that's being done on defense tech sector in particular. But separately, Ukraine has been very conscious of what big portion of their economy is SMEs. And so a lot of programs that came from EBRD, IFC, even DFC at the time were actually bank loan portfolio guarantees specifically for SMEs, right? So Ukrainian banks who know these businesses well, who have been lending or sort of can judge their credit best, they would basically be packaging these loans into a portfolio and getting guarantees from the development banks, allowing them to be extending further credit. The consciousness among the Ukrainian government of actually keeping that SME sector vibrant, keeping it alive, has been very much effective and very successful. And as you said, the defense sector came out really out of that, right? And I didn't answer the question on defense sector specifically for privatizations, but of what we hear about these drones, of interceptors, even the missiles that are becoming sort of longer and longer range, more than 90% of that is private sector, right? So it's not the state, Ukroboronprom that's producing, it's the private sector, right? And I'm sure that's going to continue being the case.
Let me ask one more question and give you a little bit of a rest, Aukse, and direct it to your colleagues here. You heard me in a question to Aukse that BlackRock's initial efforts to raise capital fell flat and they pulled out their back. In your dealings with your clients, private clients, whether they're institutions or individuals or companies, whatever, what kind of feedback do you get in terms of what is their sense, how they view Ukraine, why they may not be going into Ukraine? What are the drawbacks that they see for them to go into the country?
Yeah, so the limited partners that we work with, primarily pension plans, insurance companies, they have kind of limits on credit that we are allowed to invest in, sovereign credit. So that's why it's so important for Ukraine to get RAPs, to get DFC to come in, to get the Office of Strategic Capital at the Pentagon to come in as an equity partner or debt provider. Whatever Ukraine can do to bolster that sovereign credit rating for a particular project, that is going to unlock capital from us. So, I know we're not the only ones looking. I know KKR has sent people out to Kyiv. I know, let's see, Apollo has sent people out to Ukraine. So there are lots of private equity, private credit firms that I think are waiting for their capital to be unlocked. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I would just say, so our clients are wealthy families, tend to with a US focus, and I have to say it hasn't really come up as a conversation topic at this stage. Not to say it wouldn't. I mean, typically when things start to get on the front page of the newspaper, private clients tend to start asking about it. So we're getting questions about SpaceX at the moment.
Yeah,
so I'm sure.
I think one of the problems, well, not problems, but one of the issues with Ukraine, if you'll let me to editorialize here, is that obviously the war situation is a drawback at this time. But the war will end at some point, and the doors will be open, and it's important to get in line now. If you're not in line now, quite frankly, you're going to have a hard time getting through the front door, because the relationships will have been developed and the views of certain programs or, companies will have been developed. Anyway, let me just throw it back to the audience. We have questions here in the back. In the back. Marco, you asked too many questions, so I guess someone else a chance.
Just a quick one. Just a quick question based on President Zelensky's recent trips to the Middle East. What do you think the prospects are for Middle East money, including sovereign wealth funds coming in, and on what terms?
So the reality is there actually has been quite a bit of investment from the Ukrainian government to those Middle East relations way before the current situation. There are, the natural trade is really agricultural goods for investment money. And there have been some investments that already have been made in some agriculture companies in Ukraine by Middle Eastern companies. So I do believe that there will be more of that will be happening, but it will very much be trade driven, right? I think the bigger question is the whole energy supply and gas supply to Europe, right? And what's going to be the new potential infrastructure for it? What role Ukraine plays in that, given that it does have 30% of Europe's storage capacity for gas. Is it going to be the US flows? Is it going to be Qatar flows? And how that infrastructure is going to be developing over time? I think that's going to be a big determinant of how big of a role Middle East is going to play. But Ukrainian government has been investing quite a bit of time, primarily for agriculture sector and the needs for the population in Middle East, and I think that will continue. I think on the defense, to be seen. It's very clear that Ukraine has a lot to offer. And not just in terms of actual, cost-effective drones and interceptors, but also in the whole physical digital infrastructure of protecting some of the coastline in those countries. So I hope there will be more development on that, but it's really to the Middle Eastern countries to be taking up Ukrainian offer.
We have time for one more question. Walter says one more question. Okay, Marco.
Microphone out.
Okay, thank you. Getting back, the Trump boys, Eric and Donald Jr., just invested into Power Us, right? A company to acquire Ukraine drone technology and build drones in the United States. How has this affected the trust into your companies going into Ukraine? Thank you.
I don't really know if it's impacted anything, at least right now, from the credit side, right? Like, you could ask a managing director on our aerospace and defense team, and he could give you a totally different perspective. My initial reaction coming from the military is they probably understood the technology that's being developed. They understood that they could bring it here or can try to bring it here. And frankly, they're probably looking at Anduril's private market cap and thinking we can make, 20 times on this investment. So I don't know if, from the private credit energy side, if it's really changed anything, but from the defense side, I'm sure there's another perspective.
Maybe the only other thing that I would add, and I'm not going to comment on this specifically because I don't think it has changed anything dramatically, but in the Pentagon's, and I won't get the name right, but it was a drone something program. There were 25 companies that were selected. 5 of them were non-US companies, and 2 of those were Ukrainian companies, right? So I think it, and I'm sure this investment is very much based on the product, right? And what the product is capable of, what's the functionality of it, and what's the cost of it. And it's probably made with financial objectives. But I do think that we will be seeing more and more of that from the defense sector. And again, Zain, I thought DFC's or EURIF's first investment into Sign Engineering was a brilliant investment, right? It's basically a digital architecture company for defense sector. It's a company that has sort of just with its software sales got to 60-70 million of revenues last year. It'll be doubling that this year. So you can see the scale of these businesses. And again, as we talked in some of the previous panels, the whole way that the procurement system is designed for defense sector tells you exactly which products are the effective products, the most effective products, and which ones are not. And of course, the market is so big. The demands are so big that I'm sure this will be a very good financial investment, and there will be more of that to come. And anybody who has defense investments in their portfolio has to be looking at Ukraine, and they are.
Okay. Well, this has been a greatly informative session, I think, but unfortunately we are running out of time and we have to conclude. So I'd like to thank all our panelists for their excellent presentations and for being here with us today and helping make this conference a success. So thank you very much.
We're going to make a command decision, folks. Ambassador Markarova is going to be online and they're waiting. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, not 5, 2 minutes. Get yourself a cup of coffee. But if you don't come back in, there's going to be a firing squad out there. Thank you. 2 minutes.
So I'm coming up here now because I'm after her. Is that all right? Yeah.
No, the problem is that she may have to split. I know you're loyal. You're here.
I'm here. I'm going to the washroom. I'm coming right back.
On you, Oksana, you can try. Can you hear me? We can hear you, Mykola. We can hear you.
Okay. I'll just keep my
Can you hear
mic
me?
muted for now.
My możemy was tak samo, Pani Oksano. Thank you very much. Loud and clear.
Чудово. Зробіть м'ют це.
Are we ready? Is that Andrew? See if Andrew's ready. And Andrei, when you're discussing it, please, Adrian, make sure that that he knows that to put Markarova on the screen, because that would help. Very good. Split screen is very good. All right. I would actually please, because we are running 5 minutes behind time. We do have an announcement. As of this morning, we now know for a fact that Pani Krystyna.
Mike's not on.
All right. We now know for a fact that Pani Krystyna Freeland might not be able to, cannot join us. Olesnisha? Are you taking shots from yes. What I'm saying is that as of now, we know for a fact that we're going to have two speakers. And Adrian, I will pass it over because this is an important one. Folks, our first panel, and can everybody sit down, please? Serious. This was a very good conference, and we need to get it to its conclusion. The first part of our conference had to deal with, or the first focus session dealt with a plan for recovery. You've now heard not only the plans for the recovery, but the material base and even the financial base that might be there for the recovery. Now, what we're going to be, the people we're going to be having, and this panel with Adrian leading it, is very important because these are the people that on the ground are responsible for things that are actually already happening. And so Ambassador Markarova is online with us. Ms. Norine MacDonald has a very important project. And Adrian Karatnycky, I want to introduce him in the same way as I've introduced Herman Perchner. Herman Perchner was one wing of this entire project. And Adrian Karatnycky was the other wing. He has been with this project from the very beginning. If Herman got us Wolfowitz in that first conference in 2000, good old Adrian went to Zbigniew Brzezinski and got us Zbigniew. And it's with that, it's all started. And for 25, 26 years, we've been doing some seriously good work. So Adrian, with that, I want to hand it over to you. I know.
Thank you. We are privileged to have as our first speaker a person who has been at the center of crucial decisions and crucial moments in Ukraine's recent history, in Oksana Markarova. Her service both in the negotiation of the restructuring of Ukraine's debt as the chief of staff of the then Minister of Finance, and later as Minister of Finance, later as ambassador to the United States at a crucial time, crucial wartime, where she mobilized public support for Ukraine. And now I think she has moved on to further horizons, and that is she's involved in thinking strategically about the Ukrainian future, the rebuilding of Ukraine, how it might proceed. She is an extremely well-networked person, both in Kiev and in Washington, and I would even say globally, because of her past both government service and also some of her earlier private sector experience. So we're very privileged to have her. But before I introduce her, I wanted to just say a few things that, in a sense, we are discussing a moving target. In the last year, Ukraine's population fell by another million. So the Ukraine that we will have for the rebuilding really is path dependent on what happens in the coming years, and so on. And so while there will be a Ukraine recovery conference toward the end of June in Gdansk, and while that is an extremely welcome thing because it is now in the hands of not just the Ukrainian Ministry of the Economy, but of the Polish Ministry of the Economy, because past conferences, unfortunately, recovery conferences were not of the highest quality, in my view. They were organized primarily by foreign ministries that had only a tangential relationship to the kind of deeper issues. And I think that the new conference, the conference in Poland, shows a kind of a higher level and seriousness of purpose. And I hope that it is also partly a reflection of the ambassador's work and the work of Ukrainian diplomacy in achieving that, because it will also focus as an additional element of building, not just on infrastructure, on broad reconstruction issues, energy, and so on, but also on the defense sector as an integral part of this vision of Ukraine. The last thing I'll say is General Jomini, the great historian who invented the term logistics or employed it in military theory, a military officer, Swiss, who served Napoleon, but also served on the other side, served the Russian imperial military, wrote about how much esprit and the sort of morale is an essential part of military victory. We see in the Ukrainian people an immense drive that is manifested in the fierceness with which its soldiers and its society is rallying to fight the Russian aggression, and has created a kind of an explosion of creativity, which we now see primarily in the main area where Ukrainians are engaged, and that is the military conflict. But that, I think, harkens to this idea that the Ukrainian society will be highly mobilized for the rebuilding. So in introducing our first speaker, Ambassador Markarova and Minister Markarova, the Honorable Oksana Markarova, I hope we won't forget that in our calculations about the reality, that we integrate this idea of the immense creativity of the Ukrainian people and their, I think, immense devotion of those who have remained behind to rebuilding that country. So, Oksana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for this introduction, and big thank you to Walter Zaryckyj and US-UBC and everyone who put together this series. Some people might say the war is not over yet. Is it a time to talk about reconstruction? And I believe the time to talk about reconstruction was also yesterday, because it's very important to talk about or plan reconstruction and plan for reconstruction, attract private capital, especially into the reconstruction now, if we want to be able to do it in the most effective way, especially during the peace times. But frankly, look, Ukraine is fighting for the past 12 years, especially during the past 4 years, more than 4 now, in a full-fledged war. And in order to be able to win now in war and then to win in peace, it's very important to rebuild and repair now, and the whole government, of course, is working on that, and the whole society is working on that, but also to keep the resilience of business and to grow those sectors which are essential now, which are the backbone of Ukraine's survival and resilience now, but also could become a major drivers of development in the future. It is no secret, and Pan Zaryckyj knows it more than anyone, and you, Adrian, working on the subject for many, many years and decades, even before 2014, even before we started the many reforms, even before Russia attacked us the first time, Ukraine never realized fully its investment potential before. And there was so much that we could do and were not able to do for different reasons. We will not go into them, but in many areas, whether it's agribusiness or construction or anything else, Ukraine did not realize its full potential before. And there were challenges that Ukraine had to deal with before. And on top of that, now we have the war as the major challenge. And we also have those difficulties that are related to that, not the least of which is what you mentioned, Adrian, in your opening to this panel, which is, Ukraine as a typical European population is an aging population. But now the war presented a different challenge. We have more than 7 million people outside of Ukraine. We have some cities completely erased by Russian invasion. We have other areas which are damaged by Russian invasion, and the World Bank does this RDNA study, which Ukraine initiated at the beginning of the full-fledged conflict. And we know that even the damages just to rebuild what it was before, it's already we're talking about $500 billion worth of damages. But the key here, and I want in my opening remarks say it, the key here is not to rebuild how it was before. The key here is to build something different, to build something that is strategically positioning Ukraine for the prosperous and better future, positioning Ukraine for the leadership, the regional leadership, and maybe even beyond the regional leadership. If you look at our defense capabilities, with which President Zelensky now is talking to a number of countries, widening our global reach and repositioning Ukraine as not just a country that can that needs support, but also a country that can actually a very important element and solution to the global security. But global security is wide. It's not just about defense capabilities, it's about our agriculture. Even during the war, we feed more than 400 million people. And with leapfrogging in agriculture, imagine how much more we can do in that area and in many other areas. So essentially, I think the main theme for the reconstruction is the strategic planning of what Ukraine 2.0, 3.0, whatever you want to call this new innovative Ukraine into which we want to leapfrog, following the defense of our territorial integrity and sovereignty should be, which sectors we have to grow, which would respond to the challenges of the future. And in that future, Ukraine can emerge as not only a leader and regional leader, a true European reformed country, but also a country that is a solution to many global challenges in security, in food, in innovation, in AI, in everything that now Ukrainians are showing on the front lines and in the rear. People say necessity is the mother of invention. Ukraine has been pretty creative, and Ukrainians have been pretty creative and innovative even before the full-fledged war, even before the war started 12 years ago. But we definitely see that invention and creativity now everywhere in Ukraine. And I think that should be the basis for everything we talk in reconstruction. I believe the conference on which the governmental team is working in Gdansk is going to touch upon a number of those projects. And I'm working very hard on a pilot project of Ukraine's recovery and innovation, which is to build a new city, or to plan building of the new city for 100,000 residents, which would be a way of doing a sizable but still doable project in Ukraine. Because in addition to rebuilding existing places, Ukraine have to champion the building of the new cities. We will need at least 10 of them, if not more. And to do the first one, which will show how to build it in the most innovative, safe, new type of safe, inclusive, energy efficient, and also the city that would attract Ukrainians to come back home. That would be a first step in doing more of this project. So look forward to our discussion now, and hopefully we will be able to convey the message that to think and plan and participate in Ukraine reconstruction is not in the future, is not after the war ends, is now.
Thank you. I trust you'll stay for the discussion, so I'll turn to our second speaker, who is Norine MacDonald, who has worked at a variety of think tanks at National Defense University. She runs an initiative called RAINCLOUD Defense, which brings together people and principles in the defense technology sector under the slogan, connecting the minds that power the world. And so I think she has important insights to offer to this discussion. And I also understand that you have a visual presentation to spark your own presentation.
Thank you very much. And here we are at the end of the day. So I'm going to try and be lively and mix it up a little bit. I'm a Canadian living in Abu Dhabi. I was 7 years old when I shockingly discovered that I was not Ukrainian. I grew up, so the Canadians that are here, I grew up in a part of Saskatchewan that had German, Scottish, Ukrainian communities. And I went to school with all my little girlfriends were Horlicks and Tomaszewskis. And one Ukrainian holiday, I said to my mother, I can remember looking up at her, why are we not having special food, special this, special that? And she looked down at me and said, you'll notice my last name is MacDonald. She looked down at me and she said, because we're not Ukrainian. And I can remember the floor disappeared underneath me. And I still obviously have like a traumatic feeling about the whole thing. So doesn't the world come round? Doesn't the world come round? So here we are today. Today I come to you from the defense sector. As mentioned, my company is RAINCLOUD Defense, which is a global ecosystem of over 6,500 individuals and companies in the defense and intelligence sector of the global West. That's a digital business-to-business ecosystem where individuals and companies make business connections and knowledge connections, primarily about the arrival of new AI, new technologies, which, as you all know, has transformed the defense sector. RAINCLOUD is now launching a second platform to support the reconstruction of Ukraine. We were brought into this topic very recently by some friends, Marsh McLennan, who I mentioned earlier, have been very dedicated in their work around war risk insurance for Ukraine. We had a strategic roundtable in London not so long ago, co-hosted by Marsh, where we invited some of the other representatives from the other verticals to hear about what we had done in the defense sector and to get their inputs about doing this in support of the reconstruction effort. So we had Deutsche Bank and Oracle and BlackRock and engineering companies, all the different verticals. And so at the conclusion of that is we decided to go ahead with the build, which is underway now, and the launch, which we hope will be at Gdansk, of this digital architecture to support the community that all of you have belonged to now for decades, and we're just arriving to support the business-to-business relationships. So we have a small video so you can see the existing digital ecosystem that is RAINCLOUD Defense, and what we are working on now for Ukraine reconstruction, just so you can see what the existing platform looks like. It's only 3 minutes long, and my friend Andre in the other room has promised me it's going to run, and if not, he's going to come and do it himself in Ukrainian. Okay, Andre, go.
All right.
I'm Iman Reinert, CEO of RAINCLOUD Group. Here's a quick presentation of the RAINCLOUD Ukraine project with a quick tour of the benefits and features of the platform prototype. RAINCLOUD Ukraine is based on the proven success of RAINCLOUD Defense. With 6,000 plus vetted members in 100 countries, RAINCLOUD Defense has demonstrated success in the defense industry by creating a trusted ecosystem in a high-stakes global environment. RAINCLOUD Defense's two main benefits are connectivity and visibility. RAINCLOUD Defense is invitation only. Once you are a member, you are immediately connected to all the other members. You can find members by precise location, very specific industry segment, and by company or organization. The second benefit is visibility. Members can share and display their products and solutions in the digital defense show, strong of close to 2,000 products. They can share their insight in the thought leadership board and feature with the 2,000 article already posted. They can also share their opportunity in a specialized interactive board, and they can even share their book review in the RAINCLOUD Defense Book Corner. RAINCLOUD Defense also includes unique news and events aggregators. Finally, company and organizations can have their own private space on RAINCLOUD Defense, a private pavilion, to benefit from RAINCLOUD Defense unique catchment area. RAINCLOUD Ukraine is based on the proven success of this unique platform concept and is applying this model to build the success of Ukraine. Ukraine faces unprecedented challenges. Our platform provides the essential support and is a catalyst for the immense rebuilding effort. Our mission is to empower global collaboration and trusted interactions across the entire Ukrainian business ecosystem, supporting its immediate needs and long-term prosperity. We have already developed a prototype RAINCLOUD Ukraine. Thanks to our latest technology, you have an immediate access to the wealth of benefits available on the platform. Let's zoom in on the visibility benefits with a digital trade show. where companies can display their products in a systematic way and in 3D. Furthermore, with a private pavilion, companies and organizations can benefit from a private place to present their product at length, run their own business forum for tailored interactions with their clients, suppliers, and distributors, and display their news and events. We can develop new features such as investment matchmaking or talent sourcing based on our unique social engagement technology. This provides a trusted environment and centralized coordination, facilitating efficient collaboration among diverse international stakeholders, which is essential for success. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. You also have the handout with the video, et cetera. Some quick short points. We are convinced after our strategic roundtable in London to refer to the project as one regarding transformation, as was said earlier, not rebuilding Ukraine as it was, but building a new Ukraine that takes advantage of all the technological advantages. We believe in the now mandate, as my new friend Jock said earlier, act now and invest now. We have a very strong interest from VC funds, from a lot of family offices that support our work. And we will seed this platform with the existing members of RAINCLOUD Defense, and a significant number of them, of course, are very interested in what's happening in that particular vertical. We are working closely with a number of family office networks, all of whom are, as you heard earlier now, very interested not just in the defense sector, but in infrastructure, in engineering, in agriculture. From that point of view, I want to mention, as I said, I live in Abu Dhabi. There's a very strong interest in the agricultural strength of Ukraine, because the self-sufficiency of the UAE food system is one of their highest priorities. And they are also building their own indigenous defense sector, and their interest in Ukraine not predated recent events, if I could call them that, because their investment system requires them not only to be operational, but battle tested. So companies coming out of Ukraine in the defense sector were already prioritized in the UAE procurement system. That is, I would say, well capitalized and prioritized by their government. So there's a lot of different approaches to all of this. We're planning a soft launch in Gdansk at the conference, and I know we'll see a lot of you there. We are building an international business coalition to fast track this ecosystem so that all of you can use it in support of the good work that you've been doing. You have the handout and everybody's contact information on the back. So please do be in touch if we can work together with you in building this new ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope Ambassador Markarova is here. Is she still with us?
I am here.
Okay, so I have a question to you. So what do you think about this idea?
Yeah. Please support.
Well, which idea?
Of this networking process, the RAINCLOUD Ukraine initiative.
I think she may have just heard it.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you probably didn't see the visual, so I guess you missed the presentation. Let me then change the topic to the topic that I had raised earlier, and that is one that very few people are publicly speaking of, but which is essential to Ukraine's future economic growth, which is a workforce, and much of that workforce, a significant portion, has left the country. Do you think it is time to have an honest discussion with Europe and other places that have offered shelter to Ukrainian war refugees, at least to that part of the population, that they should not be a permanent part of the West, but should return to Ukraine? Or is that too sensitive a topic for the Ukrainian government to raise? In other words, should there be a strategy of cooperation with the West to ensure the largest possible return of Ukrainian refugees home? And what would be the elements of that process?
look, first of all, of course, we would like as many people to return home as possible. And I know that the majority of people also want to return home. That's not a question of them not wanting to return home. When I served as an ambassador in the US, of course, US had not the largest, I mean, we had hundreds of thousands, not millions of Ukrainians, as some countries in Europe. But every time I worked with Hromada, I mean, especially the new people who came on a temporary protected status, people who came as refugees from wars, everyone I've met were wanting to return home. But think about people from Mariupol, people from Bakhmut, people from places which are either under Russian occupation still or do not exist because Russia erased them really in the eastern Ukraine. I think the question is to motivate people to return. And we did polls in the communities, not only in the US, but also in Europe. And people are very clear, what do they need? What will make a difference for them to return home? First, they need a place to live, I mean, obviously. And if these people are from places which are either still under occupation or on the front lines or have been destroyed, it's a question of really us working together with our partners to find a solution. And that cannot be a temporary solution, right? It has to be some kind of permanent solution. Second, people need work. This is also important. And while there are lots of people which are needed, I mean, there is not usually a match between the needs and the skill set that the people have. That's why you probably heard the government is doing a lot of upskilling, reskilling, you know, and that's where we need a lot of support also from business and from people. Third, they need safe place for their children and safe study place. Russia is targeting specifically educational facilities, schools in Ukraine. There are a number of schools which have bomb shelters, not all of them still. I mean, they're trying, and in order for school to be operational, the government mandates it to have a space. And there are some underground schools which already, again, not something that we would want to be proud of. I wish no one had to construct underground schools, but it's a reality, especially in places like Zaporizhia or Kherson or other places where we need schools to be underground in order for children to be safe to study there. But if we can provide, I mean, one of the reasons why I started this initiative of the new city building, because I believe the answer to the question of how many people will return is not, you know, for the government to work with the government to force them to do something, but to eventually provide a possibility to do so. And that will require an effort and a very focused attempt to build something in order to tell people, here is something that answers, we need you here, we want you to come back here. Now, Adrian, let's remember that Ukraine has chosen its path, a geostrategic path. We are candidate country to the European Union. We want to be part of the European Union. If we look at any country that joined the European Union, there was first years or decade after the joining of the European Union, where within the European Union, the movement of people is free. And a number of countries, Baltic states, Poland, saw the outflow of people who then tried to had better opportunities in some other European countries. And we have to understand this is the reality of the European integration. We also see in some countries, namely, how at some point when there are opportunities in their countries, people actually return with the new skill set, with new education. So these people, Ukrainians that we have now as refugees for 4 years in Europe, they learn new languages, they learn new skills, they get more experience in European countries. They will be so valuable in Ukraine if we can find a possibility to motivate them to come back. So I believe it's more kind of a task to let's do whatever we can in order to unlock the possibilities for business to invest in Ukraine now. Let's see which areas we can develop and again build new cities, which I'm focusing on, or reconstructed new regions, because some governments are supporting reconstruction in existing cities. Let's see what we can do to operationalize, and you know that the joint Ukrainian-American investment fund, which is created the initiative of President Zelensky and President Trump, and now is being led by Ministry of Economy and DFC here and Treasury in the United States. They started doing their first investments. We need more capital into these initiatives. We need more for them to serve as anchors for private capital, and we need to engage, and that's what we are doing together with my colleague Christia Freeland, another president's advisor, how to engage in a more meaningful way with global capital in order to get them to invest in Ukraine right now, because these opportunities eventually will lead to more Ukrainians coming back. Again, Ukraine is one of the places in Europe which has a potential of a rapid growth. It had that potential before the war started. It still has that potential. And actually in the new world, which is a less safe place. I mean, look at what happened in the Gulf region. Look what happens in other places. Before, people looked at Ukraine, well, yeah, good fundamentals, good potential, maybe difficult investment climate, we don't know, let's look at other places. Now the situation is different. When everywhere is unsafe in the world, look at Ukraine, which after 12 years of war, 4 years of full-fledged war, shows resilience, which you cannot find anywhere. What is the secret? Well, in order to learn that secret, you have to be in Ukraine. You have to work with Ukraine. You have to invest in Ukraine. You have to learn these lessons firsthand. That will make the global players more successful. And I believe Ukraine will be, I believe it is already now, the it place for businesses to put it on investment map and be there. Again, we have to probably do a better job in explaining and selling it to people. But I believe that the return of the people is going to be a function of that.
Thank you.
And also, just to quickly add, the reason why I'm putting always emphasis on innovations, in some industries, we can do more output without having more people. It's again, this is the answer to the challenge, demographic challenge, is not always let's find more people. It's always how to do in agri-tech, in fintech, in everything else, how to do it with the people that we have, but still to have higher productivity.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions. So very brief questions. Anything from the floor? Yes, no? I guess everyone is, okay, please, sir. Microphone, and then please identify yourself, and then we can.
Tom McDevitt, Chairman of the Times. I'm fascinated with the RAINCLOUD concept. How long did it take to develop that comprehensive multi-sector approach? I think it's a model that can be used in lots of different situations.
Thank you. When we started RAINCLOUD Defense, that's our own sector. So we started it as subject matter experts and learned how to build a platform. In this case, we know how to build a platform, and we're coming to all of you to help us build it properly for the Reconstruction Initiative. That was harder because we started one by one, recruiting people to join the initiative. In this case, we will seed this platform with the over 6,000 members of RAINCLOUD Defense and a couple of years worth of experience. So we know there's such a strong interest from private capital in the reconstruction of Ukraine that we believe this one will scale quickly.
One last question. Otherwise, we will thank everyone, especially Ambassador Markarova, for such a. Oh, there is a. All right, please.
Hi, I'm Christina Jahan from the Ukrainian-American Youth Civics Club. So you mentioned getting Ukrainians to come back to Ukraine. And I was wondering what an incentive would be to get Ukrainians to come back to Ukraine, since a lot of them obviously have had their lives destroyed in Ukraine, and they've come to America or other countries in Europe and have restarted their lives there. And if they have had kids, many of those kids have started school there and have gone to colleges there. So what would be different initiatives or objectives to get those people to come back to Ukraine?
Well, I can only say, look at me. I went to study in the US in 1999. because after graduating from Kyiv Mohyla Academy and working back home, I wanted to get a degree in American University, and I ended up in Indiana University getting my public finance degree. And then I worked in Washington in the World Bank, and it was a very interesting life. But at some point, I realized that I can actually achieve more in Ukraine if I come back to Ukraine with my new skills. So it's great that we have kids studying in schools outside of Ukraine, getting their degrees in the universities. But I think, again, as Ukraine will go into this massive rebuilding, which is going on now, but definitely will be there after the war will end, and we will win this war. Again, I know it's difficult now. I know it's difficult during all these 12 years.
Thank you.
People in diaspora who fought for independent Ukraine will tell you that we are in a much better place now than when we were occupied under by the Soviet Union. So there will be immense opportunities in Ukraine, and I don't think it's bad that people are outside of Ukraine right now studying, because we will need all of them in Ukraine, and there will be opportunities in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And I think this was a very, as you have been a great advocate of Ukraine, everyone can see it. And I think you've made an extremely strong and competent case. And we're very grateful to Ms. MacDonald for her beginning of a very important contribution to networking for the Ukrainian economy. And I think I will conclude this session. We have a couple of closing remarks, and I will turn it over to Walter Volodymyr Zaryckyj, and thank you very much for your contributions in this session.
Yes, I wanted, and it's too bad that Andrei shut off Ambassador Markarova, because I did want to tell her that those 4 years that she spent as our ambassador, they were well spent, because you can see she still represents us better than just about anybody. It's Norine. You could see Tom McDevitt, Washington Times, is probably going to write something about
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so anyway, speaking of Mr. McDevitt, we have this last session, Mr. Chumak, who's in the program, fell ill and was not able to make it. But apparently he has given a statement, and that statement will be read to our audience. At the same time, Tom, would you like to get up here and say, because do you think we should read the statement first? Okay, then Chris. And Mykola will, Mykola Vizir is going to be as well. Okay. All right, Chrissy. Yeah, please. And Pavlo, I didn't realize that. Yes, I forgot that.
Do I have to stand? Do I have to stand?
Можна, да?
I'm reading Mr. Chumak's statement. No, yes.
Добрий день. Мене звати Микола Візір. Я представляю державне підприємство «Морський індустріальний кластер Березань». На жаль, я вільно не володію українською мовою, тому я попрошу переводити. Я десь чув, що буде перевод.
Is Mykola Hritskovyan ready to translate for?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, we hear Mykola.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Mykola Vizir, and I'm representing the Ukrainian industry, and I will be more than happy to make some comments.
В далекому 2019 році по ініціативі групи Санпро був започаткований шлях до реалізації проєкту Березань-Порт.
So in the far-off 2019, under the initiative of the company SunPro, the project of the Berezань port was initiated.
При підтримці Офісу Президента особисто було засновано наше підприємство для координації дій по цьому проєкту. І ми пройшли великий шлях, зробили технічне обґрунтування, ізискання, а головне, ми розробили концепцію, яку вам сьогодні представив CEO нашого проєкту Джон Квін. Ви мали можливість ознайомитись з першими параметрами цього проєкту, але я хочу мати можливість розставити деякі акценти на цьому проєкті в рамках нашого сьогодні дискусії форуму по економіці.
So, with the support of the presidential office, the company was put together to realize this project. You heard the technical aspects of it from Mr. John Quinn, and you've seen the first phase of this project during the discussion on Ukrainian industry here. And I would like to make some comments on all of this to put the dots.
Колеги в своїх доповідях згадували тут план Маршалла, який потрібен Україні. Але я чогось згадав другий, приклад. Ровно 80 років тому в Америці була провозглашена Фултонська річ. Десь в ті часи, чи в березні, чи в квітні. І я думаю, що це дуже созвучно зараз нашим подіям, які тривають в сучасному світі. І ми з вами стали свідками драматичних подій, які рушать вже привичну нам архітектуру і конструкцію економіки і життєдіяльності всього світу. Ми бачимо, що вже не працюють ті механізми, які були започатковані тоді в 46-му році, і які дали нам стримання на великий період. Але зараз ми... Але зараз ми маємо будувати нову геополітичну конструкцію, і ми вважаємо, що економіка України має мати гідне місце на мапі економічної Європи і світу. Тому цей проєкт Березань-Порт, він важливий чим?
So the Marshall Plan was initiated all those years ago, and 80 years ago, this program helped alleviate all the dramatic acts that happened worldwide at that time. But now, in our situation, now we see a situation where the world order that was established in 1946 has been seriously shaken. And we need to work on a new geopolitical structure. And I'm going to explain how the Berezань port project is a building block of that.
Березань-Порт – це нова модель, яка ще в Україні не була опробована, бо це кластерна економіка. Березань-Порт, перш за все, це кластер – логістичний, індустріальний і гуманітарний. На цій платформі буде базуватись логістика, індустріальна зона та гуманітарна, смарт-сіті, дата-центр і проче, що надасть можливість закумулювати Україні в післявоєнній на цій арії при условиях фрі-зони дуже швидко розвернути індустріальну промисловість, яку ми, на жаль, втратили на Сході.
So this Berezань port is a new model. It's a cluster hub, and that's something new for Ukraine. That includes logistics, manufacturing, and humanitarian sectors. And this is something that will help us rebuild our industry very quickly, and this industry which was essentially destroyed in eastern Ukraine.
Інвестиції можуть зайти тільки тоді, коли вони розуміють, які правила гри. І вони повинні бути оправдані, без ризику і прибильні. І ми вважаємо, що оцей проєкт підтягне законодавчу працю Верховної Ради по створенню законодавчої бази для фрі-зон, яких в Україні, на жаль, немає.
So investments can come in, but only if they understand the rules of the game. And this can be very profitable, but we need the legal basis. We need the Verkhovna Rada to create the legal basis for all of this, and the legal basis essentially for free economic zones.
Коли буде правила фрі-зон, то інвестору не треба буде поясняти, як воно буде працювати. Для цього є приклади Інчань, Аль-Джабель-Алі і прочі.
So the rules of a free zone their competitive advantage is that investors understand these rules because these are the same rules that are in place in other free zones throughout the world.
Наприклад, Україна на Сході втратила більш 40 мощностей своїх металургійних потужностей. І в цьому проєкті ми зараз запропонували в рамках нашого концепту 3 основних кита. Це сталь, титан, алюміній і переробка мінералів.
So, for example, 40% in the East, 40% of our metal industry was lost. And what we're proposing is to rebuild this, concentrating on steel, titanium, and minerals.
І розташування близьке до основних копалищ – це месторождення рудні Криворожський басейн, Полтавські гоки, Миколаївські шламові для переробки поля, які створюють екологічну угрозу. Все це дає можливість мати близьку сирійову з нульовим плечом базу.
So one of the efforts would be to have the industry close to the various resources, like in the Kryvyi area, the Mykolaiv area, the Poltava area, and that would allow supplies to the industry for processing.
По-друге, це дуже важливо зрозуміти, що це надає надію, що заработає Балтійська Чорноморська дуга. Це свободні економічні зони Прибалтики будуть мати з'єднання з свободним економічним хабом, зоною на Чорному морі. Таким образом, ми з'єднаємо сьогодні Балтику і Чорне море, і в реверсі ми можемо обмінюватися, інтегруватися економіками, товарами, грузооборотом, і бути більш міцнішими, і сформувати економічний союз, який надасть нам безпекові гарантії.
So second would be this would allow us to create a Black Sea Baltic axis of free economic zones. So this would unite the Baltic and the Black Sea areas, and this would free up exchange between those areas, and that would allow us to strengthen our economies. And by strengthening our economies, we would also strengthen our collective security.
Зараз формується нова транспортна система ТНТ. І сьогодні будується Віа Карпатія, яка вже з'єднує Гданські промислові райони Польщі через Європу на Салоніки. Але Україна має право на включення і має на свій транспортний коридор в цій же системі. І ми вважаємо, що виключати Україну, якщо ми хочемо розвідку післявоєнною, то треба зараз вже в проєкт Березань закладає можливості нам теж мати свій транспортний коридор і вийти в єдину систему ТНТ європейську.
So right now there's a new transport corridor being created, TNT, and right now there's the project of uniting Gdansk with Salonika, and the Carpathian Road is being built right now. And Ukraine needs its input into all of this so that Ukraine is also integrated into this new transport system, which is being built in Europe.
І можна багато про це все розказувати, але я хочу вже напослідок розказати такий приклад, на мій погляд, який покаже інвестиційну привлекательність цього проєкту.
So there's a lot that can be talked about, but I'd like to give you an example which would illustrate the benefits of this.
В рамках розробки концепта наша група була в Сеулі в свободній економічній зоні Інчань в Південній Кореї.
So our group to study free economic zones were in Seoul in South Korea.
І ми мали зустріч з корпораціями Hyundai, POSCO.
So we met with Hyundai and POSCO.
І вони виявили дуже цікаву таку зацікавленість, і вони сказали, що зараз вони теж в рамках того, що відбувається в світі, і санкції, війна, а їх промисловість на 80% розташована в Китаї, всі їх промислові мощності, то корейці кажуть, було б добре нам до ринків, наші ринки в Європі, і автомобільні, і металургійні. І якщо б така зона запрацювала в Україні, то ми б свою промисловість, з учетом того, що ви маєте дуже качественний чоловічий ресурс, сир'єву базу, то ми б розмістили машинобудування, металургію на базі Березань-Порт.
So they voiced interest in all of this. They said that 80% of their industry or 80% of industry is focused on China. But our main markets are in Europe, and we see that Ukraine has a good labor force, and we'd be very much interested in building up the industry of machine building and metallurgy in Ukraine because it's closer to our markets.
Тому ми надіємося, що цю конференцію почують інвестиційні фонди, крупні транснаціональні компанії, зацікавляться, і ми відкриті до цієї праці на стадії feasibility стадії. Я дуже дякую вам, що ви дали можливість нам виступити ще раз. І до зустрічі в вільній Україні.
So I believe this conference will be observed by various investors, and I believe this will cause interest in the projects that we have highlighted here. And hopefully this will result in a feasibility study with regard to this. And in the end, I would like to thank everybody, and I would like to thank your support and help for Ukraine.
So now I would like to read a statement from Mr. Chumak. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine is facing a challenge, the scale of which Europe has not known since the Second World War. It is not just about restoring destroyed infrastructure or compensating for losses. It is about much more, about a deep rethinking of the state's economic model, its modernization, structural renewal, and integration into the global economic space. In this context, a key question arises: where to find the necessary capital? Why, despite Ukraine's obvious potential, do we still not see a sufficient scale of investment presence? For foreign investors, the Ukrainian market often remains an environment of high uncertainty, where it is difficult to effectively manage assets, and a well-known crisis of confidence hinders the adoption of long-term decisions. At the same time, we have strong, energetic, talented entrepreneurs who have experience, ideas, and the ability to create new value, but they remain largely cut off from available capital. Bank lending is too expensive, and access to large international investment instruments for small and medium-sized businesses is actually limited. That is why we see this challenge not only as a problem, but also as a massive historic opportunity for private capital. And today, on behalf of Pavlo Chumak, the president of SunPro Group, I want to present an idea that combines three fundamental dimensions: investment, the restoration of Ukraine, and trust in its future. The essence of our proposal is the issuance of a digital asset, the token coin. This is not about cryptocurrency in its speculative sense, not creating a tool for excitement, instant speculation, or financial noise. This is a valuable digital asset that confirms the investor's share in the portfolio of real Ukrainian enterprises. Imagine that you buy a share, but instead of a paper certificate or a record in the register of a traditional financial institution, you receive a digital token. It is stored in your digital wallet, in particular on your smartphone. It can be held, transferred, or sold. In other words, our model is a combination of the expertise of a professional investment fund and the advantages of modern digital technologies. How does this work in practice? We issue a limited number of token coins and thus raise capital from investors. The funds raised are directed to the real sector of the economy: industry, agricultural production, energy, IT, and other industries that have the potential for growth and scaling. As the financed enterprises begin to operate stably and generate profits, the value of the fund's assets increases, and with the value of the coin. Blockchain technologies in this model are used not for fashion or technological effect, but solely as the tool for ensuring transparency, accessibility, and trust. This is what allows an investor from anywhere in the world to invest even a small amount, track the use of funds, and understand the logic of capital movements in real time. And what is no less important, unlike classic long-term funds, such an asset potentially provides higher liquidity since it can be sold without having to wait years for the completion of the full investment cycle. I would like to separately emphasize another fundamental advantage of this idea: the combination of financial profitability and social value. Each financed project is not only a potential profit for the investor, it is also new jobs, restored production facilities, tax revenues for local communities. And this is precisely the fundamental difference between the proposed model and charity. Of course, charity is extremely important. It has already saved thousands of lives and continues to play an exceptional role. But the country's economy is restored in the long term, not only through donations. It is restored primarily through investments in working businesses, in production, in entrepreneurship, in the creation of added value. That is why we propose an approach in which social impact and financial profitability do not contradict each other, but, on the contrary, mutually reinforce each other. Another important advantage of this model is its openness to a wide range of participants. Traditionally, large-scale investment opportunities remain available mainly to a narrow circle of large funds or extremely wealthy investors. In our case, a different logic is laid. to make participation more accessible, more understandable, and more transparent. This in particular creates a real mechanism for involving the Ukrainian diaspora, and well as people and the organizations in different countries who seek not just to emotionally support Ukraine, but to particularly participate in shaping its economic future. This is just a concept, and of course, a deeper analysis will be needed. The success of such an initiative is possible only under the condition of partnership with large, reputable, and institutionally strong players in the financial sector. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that this investment initiative is an opportunity to turn solidarity with Ukraine into concrete economic action. It is an opportunity to direct capital to where it creates new value. It is an opportunity to support not only recovery, but also long-term growth. And this is ultimately an opportunity to build Ukraine's future, not only on the basis of aid, but also on the basis of strong, systemic, thoughtful, and effective investment decisions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank Pavlo. I appreciate his words very much. Another round of applause for him. Thank you so much. I have 5 minutes because, but because we are going into a reception and I don't want to stand between you and a glass of wine, I'll cut it down to 2 minutes and even 1 minute. Number one, thank you, Walter. This was an outstanding program, so densely packed with content that American people need to know. And that's why the Washington Times is here. And we're here as a sponsor. Other competitors, the Post, the New York Times, are not. Why is that? The Times was founded when the Cold War was hot, 1982. There was one newspaper in Washington, the Washington Post. The Washington Star had folded, and the Times came about to tell the truth about freedom and the American story. And so that's why we're here. We plan to do a special report on this conference and stay on the front line of telling what I think is the most exciting vision and story on the planet is to rebuild Ukraine. Second only to that is to keep the Indo-Pacific open and free amidst the big colossal battle, which some call a civilization crisis between good and evil, between authoritarianism and freedom. So that's why we're here. With that, I just want to say thank you to Walter, to Ambassador Popadiuk, my dear friend, and especially to SunPro for all of their support of this. I want to also, I was so impressed with the young people that are here and the students, and thank God you're here. And God, move forward and take the reins and make this reality. I thought, and I'm a mind map advocate. I take notes by mind mapping. I have 14 pages of notes. I did not miss a concept. I edited it down, and I was going to go through, and it would take about 45 minutes to highlight each session. Of course, I'm not going to do that, but we are going to do a special report on this. But I was just so moved by the depth, the accuracy, the breadth. It almost brings tears to my eyes to think of this horrid situation of brutal destruction. How can that happen in the 21st century? How many children you have to go to underground schools to go to school? It's unthinkable in so many ways. But to hear the vision and the depth of this, Walter, and all of your associates, I think it's just A+. And the world needs to know it. I won't go through the outline. I think it was brilliant from stem to stern. I want to finish, though, and applaud the Unity Club, my dear friend, Ambassador Popadiuk and Pavlo. I think we were looking forward to a 100-page report, right? We want to track that. And I think Congress needs to know about it. It needs to become popularized to those who care. But I think this document that you did, this summary document that Anders did in the beginning is so important, and we want to pay a lot of attention to that. And finally, just from a personal note, to the RAINCLOUD Ukraine. I'm working on a project called the Taiwan Freedom Project, and the design of this is actually like this, a multi-sector, multi-level global effort to push back on Xi Jinping, create the conditions so that a Ukraine catastrophe or a Hong Kong catastrophe doesn't occur in Taiwan. And so I'm grateful for that. So with that, my final point, the political will of the American leadership has to be fortified by citizens who are informed. And that's why I'm here, with the public diplomacy and the journalism, but also the strategic communications and advocacy. So I hope to be in touch with you. Thank you once again. If we had our drinks here, I would raise a toast. God bless Ukraine to a future Ukraine.
Thank you very much.